Hey, fellow Gianteers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. Um, so we're wrapping up this relationship series. I think we took a little twist in this, as we like to take a little twist. And the idea was to really think deeply about what it means to design a life of your own. And we're kind of using Carl Jung a little bit as a case study. We're also throwing, I think, parts of our own lives in here to talk about what it means to build a life of your own. And whether or not the life that you want to build agrees with the life that I want to build or Daniel wants to build, up to you. But we're at least going through the process of what it feels like to do that, you know? So we've been kind of like going like step by step in these like roundup episodes we're doing at the end, just to talk about, okay, what are the values that, a little bit, I wrote these up. Our team in Chicago, the beloved Chicago Bears, were getting their ass kicked on a Sunday. I was writing this up thinking, what do I actually think? What does Carl Jung think? I was kind of jotting these notes down about this, kind of knowing that Dana would put in his own thoughts on this too. And it's just kind of this interesting thing of thinking, okay, what does it mean to really try to build a life that reflects your own point of view, which is really the mission statement of the whole podcast adventure that we're doing. I was thinking about it, Daniel, sometimes when we talk about this in text between one another and we talk about this G and T thing, we don't go G and T like an and sign. We go G N T like TNT. Or we put a little exploding emoji behind it. Because I guess that's how I sometimes think about this, like a little explosion of spiritual thought or something. But also like this idea of this, like what would happen? Here's the thought experiment we're doing. What would happen if you just blew up all these rules? You just blew them up for yourself. Bang. What would happen then, like if you just wanted to start rebuilding things from the ground up? What would that even look like? And I was just thinking about that imagery, right? If you just exploded it and just said, okay, now I'm starting from scratch. What do I really think about and believe in? So G and T, boom. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It would so like I know that's sort of a rhetorical question, but I think it's one worth tackling.
Nope, it was definitely a question for you.
Okay, yeah, right at the onset. Yeah. So it's a good question, right? Because that's essentially what we're kind of always asking this thing. So if you have a fear of loss and that is a dominating feature in your life, then even the sort of thought experiment of doing that would be harrowing,
But maybe beneficial too.
Partly beneficial, but depends on how you view that. Depends on how you view that, So if that's difficult for you, then you might see this opportunity for freedom, as we might say, on one hand, as a huge opportunity for there to be like a large gap in experience, or that the wheels were falling off, or the floor was giving out, or all that will be around you will be emptiness, and not in the kind of blissful, fully containing emptiness, but like actual vacuum, like you would experience a vacuum of that state. And I think, as we've discussed before, like, anthropologically, if you were looking at it from an evolutionary perspective, that the loss of one's community or the loss of a tight bond or something like this would feel very detrimental to the success of your own living, right? Your own livingness, if that's even a word, because you might be ousted from it would feel maybe evolutionarily that you would be ousted from the place in which you would get your nourishment from, and therefore you might starve or die, or that's kind of where our minds go to anyway. So there's maybe some physiological response to that would be that would cause you not to do those things from that perspective, right? Specifically physiologically. But then I think, on the other hand, and again, it really comes down to your perspective, which is what we end up talking a lot about, is working with that. You might feel that there's large opportunities for you to do something different or do something similar, but with the new mindset. And I think, and I'll certainly let you hear what you have to say, but I think that's the one part of this that we maybe say, but we don't say it enough, is that like, if someone was to do this or step into this arena in parts of their life, maybe not all of it, that there has to be wholesale change. That's not necessarily the case. You could do things similarly, but as we've mentioned numerous times, it's not what you're doing, but how you go about doing it. And so if you approach it from a different perspective, but it looks externally like it looked yesterday, the change doesn't have to be reflected in the outer world. The change only has to be experienced on the inner. And that's the really important part for people.
or you're doing it because you really want to do it, as opposed to you're just
Yeah.
like sliding along with some momentum that's just carrying you, as opposed to you saying, okay, I'm going to seize control of this.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I like this. I don't mind doing this, but at least I know I'm doing this from
Yeah.
a different place or something like that.
Yeah.
A place for my own really wanting to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah. And I guess part of it's like the exhilaration of this, just going and saying, okay, this is exhilarating to do this, to find
Mm-hmm.
that spot in yourself. And then I said this multiple episodes. All I can say is like, this is one of the most important things I ever did. So in a weird way, for me, this is like a culmination of these whole set of podcast episodes that we've been doing over these years. I mean, we'll keep doing more.
Yeah.
I won't just like, okay, I'm done. That's it. I'm rolling it up. No, yeah. But this is kind of the culmination of what I actually probably think about this deep down. Because
Yeah.
some of this has been pretty personal for me too.
I have sort of a slight real life example. I have a client of mine who is not that close to retirement age, what we would consider retirement age, but she's in her mid 50s, and um she had wanted between her and her husband, their kids are in college, and so they're thinking about what retirement looks like. And she had said to me when we started working a couple of years ago, oh, once I get to X amount of money, she never shared the amount of money that she needed, but once I get to this amount of money, we're good. We're set. We can live off of our investments and what we have, and whatever. Okay, fine. Well, she ended up early, getting that money early. She said that she got a huge bonus and she had met her goal. And I said, well, when's the retirement party?
Uh-huh.
And then she pulled out a second card and said, oh, I also had a secondary goal of being in a career position to be able to be on boards at other companies. And I was like, oh, we never mentioned that before. She's like, well, that was kind of a secondary goal. The financial one was the important one. I said, well, now that you've reached your goal and you can do whatever you want, what are you going to do? And she's like, I'm not sure. I'll keep working until I figure it out. But for me, I'd be like, you reached a goal. Like,
I guess the question is whether or not once she's on the board, whether there's a secret tertiary goal that another card comes
but
out.
that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying is
that's
that
the question, right?
this is what I'm talking about, is that when there's this chance to pull the Band-Aid off and go, okay, now let's do something else. So it's like the American dream, right? Work until you can retire, maybe retire early, and now you could do what you want with your time. Newsflash, you haven't been doing shit with your time for the last X amount of years, but raising your family and enjoying dinners and some travel, which is beautiful, but the flame that has not been tended to, so your passions for hobbies or meditation or whatever, music, it doesn't matter, those haven't been stoked. So you're starting a lot of things when you haven't been tending to them at all. They're nascent inside of your experience.
Yeah, all I can say about it again is like, this was the most important thing I ever did in my life. So the extent that we're trying to talk about what the important things that you feel like you've done, like this was it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have a lot of different variations on that theme like this. Yeah. And again, it's the whole thing. Like, even you talk about, I was using this G&T metaphor. That's kind of an inner thing to do as much as what you're saying is an outer thing.
Yeah.
It's an inner thing. You're sort of like, well, let me blow these things. I have to trash my whole life around me. That's kind of being the drama mama anyways. But I could at least do this inside and then start thinking, okay, what would I really want this to look like? Which is really also saying, what do I truly believe in?
Yeah.
Like, what do I really believe in?
Mm-hmm.
And let me look at that, from a perspective of like, okay, now I've cleared the entire decks of this. And then, we'll start from there. And I'll say what it is that I truly believe in. Which, okay, now our previous episodes partially was, okay, points that we did. We did like enlightenment is kind of a goal, whatever that means to you. And Carl Jung, he talked about the idea that he wanted to kind of like understand his own inner world, his own unconscious, and bring it out and make it expressed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of his big things. He also realized, and he saw that as being partially a Buddhist thing. He got that it was Buddhist. He also said, well, maybe for him, it's not going to be absolutely Buddhist, but he saw it in that context for sure. And we kind of talked about him in previous episodes, his experience of that. And then he started to realize, like, well, I guess I'm going to have to come up with my whole own way of like thinking about my own myth. Because he sort of realized, like, once I blew this out, this was gone. For him, he realized, well, the myths that I grew up with, very Jungian way to describe this, myths. But okay, the myths I grew up with don't apply to me anymore. And so now I'm going to have to come up with new myths. to guide my life, which I think is a great thing to ask all of us too. What's the myth you would write for yourself? That's kind of like our secret thing anyways, because Rumi talks about that too. Write your own myth, right? And he also realized that there might be points of conflict now between himself and the world around him. But he took on the challenge of dealing with that, realizing that, my attitude, my goals, my myth. And he uses this like ethics and morals thing. He said, well, okay, I want to, the morals of this don't apply to me as much anymore because I don't believe in them in the same way I used to. So I'm going to come up with my own ethics, my own way of how I'm going to look at and value my life. And then we got to the idea of like love, because we were ending up on the love episodes. And this was obviously a big part of Jung's life. And for him, it got to the point where he no longer had a traditional way of looking at how he thought about love and relationships in the context of his life. We'll explore that more again as we kind of go along in this one too. And so probably the more traditional Judeo-Christian way of thinking about things he grew up with, that wasn't going to work for him anymore. He also wasn't like a biological materialist either, like maybe like a Freud was, or like a lot of people might be. That didn't work for him either. So I guess it put him in the position of having to go, okay, I'm gonna have to figure out whatever my own value system of this is, right?
Mm.
And part of that was changing the meaning of how he thought. I'm trying to see, like, I think it was like energy before form we talked about a lot. This idea that he felt like he had connections with people that were deep, and he wanted to come up with ways of living them according to his own terms, as opposed to being boxed in to what might have been the way he might have seen things before, or what might have been sort of like the cultural attitude, and obviously for him that led to something that you would call a polyamory, but whether that's a polyamory or in a real sense or not, I guess we can explore that idea too. But that was this idea, right? That was the kind of the energy before form part of this, which I think gets to the idea of, we also talked about like two different levels of reality, sort of the level of reality that's more like the social level of reality and the spiritual level of reality. And those two things may or may not be in sync. So those, I think, are the main points we've done so far. I know, anything else you think you wanted to add to that one, or does that seem like that's a good summary of what we've been talking about?
That's a good summary.
All right. So what did he think about love and relationship then? Because I think that's getting to the capper of pulling a lot of this stuff together. And so because it comes from this energy before form level of reality, on the one hand, it's not going to necessarily follow the rules of this world. And on the other hand, it has a kind of a mysterious quality to it. And Jung really got this. This has been my experience too. I'll be interested in hearing your experience with this as well, is you can't predict how this is going to happen. And then there is something transcendent about the experience of this when it does really appear in your life, oftentimes in unexpected ways. So Jung gets this. I kind of took a couple of his quotes here just to give his feeling for this. And so he would say things like, who can exhaust the mystery of love? I falter before the task of finding the language which might adequately express the incalculable paradoxes of love. In some ways, he also sees it as like, the problem of love seems to me a monster of a mountain, which for all my experience has always soared still to greater heights whenever I thought I had almost reached the top. Because, one of the other quotes from him, what occurs between the lover and the belover is the entire fulfillment of the Godhead. So he's framing this in very spiritual terms. Both are unfathomable riddles to each other, for who can understand the Godhead? Kind of the same way who can understand these kinds of things that magically can happen between people. And one of the really famous things it says is like, whenever two people meet, it's an alchemical reaction, if it really is something. And that means both people are going to be transformed by this. So that's sort of his attitude towards this. And for me, I think about things that way. I do sort of see things through the idea that there are going to be people with whom you have something a little magical. It doesn't always have to be romantic. It doesn't have to be sexual, but there's magical events that happen between people. I suppose we can go back to our Rumi and Shams of Tabriz example that, is kind of a good one here. Whether they were romantically involved or not, who's to say? Two men in the Muslim world at the time of Rumi's life. Tradition says no. Who knows? But in any case, they deeply transformed one another. And I guess I'm a big believer in that. So, all right. I'll throw it back to you, Daniel. What do you think about what Jung is saying?
Yeah, I mean,
Speak
I
to
think
you?
yeah, I mean, I feel like this is an extension of that kind of exclusion or exclusivity versus unique oriented discussion that we had
Yeah,
a
yeah,
few
yeah.
episodes ago. You know that there are going to just be some people that, you know, touch you in some kind of a particular way, and if you allow the exploration of that relationship in whatever way that it manifests, it doesn't, we're referencing it as a relationship, not exclusively sexual,
Mhm.
but that the exploration of that relationship, there's power in that, and that doesn't necessarily even have to be at the cost of your traditional monogamous partnership, but that we'll go back even further to the Wilhelm Reich stuff, and that the repression of that even mental exploration, let alone in reality, that the actual exploration of that potential bond can make somebody feel some kind of way, some kind of tension, some sort of repression. There's an energy, an act of binding in this case, that keeps those two things separate. And if we're going to use the kind of, I guess, quote or thought from Carl Jung in this case, that if it's, sort of a holographic kind of reflection of the relationship with the divine or the Godhead, as he calls it, then one could make the argument, one being me in this particular moment, that that is similar to you restricting your own relationship with the energy before form. So the energy of love, right, as a representation of divinity, that you yourself are wrapping yourself from that, and again, it doesn't have to be at the behest of your monogamous relationship. It's just to say that, like, those things exist, and saying that they don't exist is a repressive thing, and then not acknowledging that you yourself are feeling that, then is again a continuation of repression. And that doesn't allow yourself, I think, to express the full gamut of what you could, and again, like I said earlier, that doesn't mean you have to divorce your partner and leave your kids because you had a good conversation with the waitress at Applebee's.
Yeah, that would be a big stream.
Yeah, like that would be an extreme. But it's also to say that if you have a good kinship with somebody that you've known or you don't know or whatever, but there just seemed to be a bond there, that you can explore, some kind of like emotional intimacy, or something along this line, right, that
This is
allows yourself to be open.
a heck of a question because I got a little bit more on this. I want to talk a little bit about Zen Master EQ and some of his attitudes about this similar feeling of connectivity. But I mean, so I like to do that too before we get out of here today. But you're bringing up something that I think is really deep, and I'd be curious, for people who are listening, who we have listeners who are international, and like just to see what attitudes
Yeah,
are in other cultures about this. But
yeah,
all I can say about this whole thing, I'm going to hold this belief no matter what. I'm going to say I believe in this whole way of looking at the world, and I'll give my EQ version of it in the second. I give my Carl Jung version of it. I'll kind of like talk about what I think this means to me in terms of the way that I would frame and view the world. But I could say American culture, in my experience of it overall, really hates this. Like it really doesn't like it at all. So if you have a different opinion, you can let me know. Yeah, I'm always doing a little bit of research in our episodes. And I gave another listen to like some of the Esther Perel stuff. And then, there's Dan Savage, who's another person who comments on these things. And all I can really say is that this idea of like exclusivity is really, really strong. And
yeah,
my experience, at least, has been even when you say like, okay, well, this has to be platonic, but we could still be emotionally and intellectually close. A lot of times, or maybe the most of the time, as
yeah.
far as my experience, is no way.
No, yeah,
The exclusivity principle is so strong in this culture.
yeah,
And again, we all have our own, if we frame these things as orientations, we all have our own orientations, and that's not to judge anybody on this, but all I can really say is it's strong. And I had an interesting conversation, Ryan Davenport, anthropologist on call, and we were talking about
but
this, and
on demand.
yeah,
Or even on tap.
yeah.
Mm,
Um, so I brought this up, and I can't remember if we talked about this or not, Daniel, but I've even had this with like male friends where it's just been like, no. they'll get involved with someone and they have to cut those close male friends out of their life. It's that strong of an exclusivity
Mm.
thing. And it's like straight male friends, we ain't doing nothing with each other, gone, you know? And so it really is very deep. And I don't know what to make of that. I've thought about this a lot in my life because this has been a kind of repeating theme of my existence. You get close with people and they'll cut, there's boom, they
Yeah,
cut
they will
based
cut.
on this and they're gone. And I have to say for myself, I think partially because I'm not really a creature of this culture for whatever reason. I kind of frame it in the idea like I must have reincarnated from someplace else and I don't really get this place. But that part has been shocking to me at times where I'm like, I can't believe it. Like you can never satisfy this demand for this, exclusivity thing. And it's with dudes I knew where their wives would just be like, no, this guy has to go. You're too close with him. No, I find it intimidating. And they've jettisoned, like one of my best friends growing up, this happened. Like he cut me out of his life because his
Was
wife
that
was
was
like,
that just
no,
you, or was that other people in general? Because I find it
pretty
tends,
much just across the board.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. I find
It's
it tend
across the board. They just cut people out.
they
It's an
just cut people
amazing
out.
thing. And again, I'm like kind of like talking about my own experience of this and with yours too. But like I if there's anything I don't understand, I really don't understand this. Like I find this, and I'm a uniqueness dude or whatever. But
Mhm.
this I find very, very hard to understand. I don't know what that is inside. I've tried to
The-
ask people about even like what's going on inside of you where you feel like this is necessary or why you would even want to do that. Because for me, when I think about this coming from my mindset, I'm like, I don't even understand why someone would want that. Having a partner, I wouldn't want them to cut off their experiences or cut off other people. I don't need that. And even if someone offered it to me, I'd say like, no, keep that. I don't want you to do that for me.
Mhm.
So I have to be honest, I have no access into that. I don't know what that means, but let me throw it over to you. You can kind of share your own
So
experience with
I
this. And
guess what the question I have then is, your assertion here is that the strength of this person's exclusivity requirement
Mhm.
is such that their partner cannot have deep connection with anybody outside of their own family, or even to include their own family.
I
Or
mean, I
it's
guess
their
it must maybe include the nuclear family with their own kids, but a lot
right,
of
but
times it
outside
becomes a
of the
very
household.
narrow. Yeah,
Yeah.
it becomes very, very narrow.
Yeah.
Have you had that experience
Uh no, it would never happen. Have I had that me personally or with friends of mine?
with friends who have done that?
Um, yeah, yeah, but there were looser connections, so it wasn't. I found that it was a two-parter. That like
Mhm.
when people were single, they had more time to hang out, right?
Uh-huh,
And so
uh-huh.
therefore you're seeing them more, you're building this connection more, then that energy inherently has to be shuffled into their relationship because they're wanting to build and so on and so forth. And then so there's a natural bit of a separation. But I do think that what you're bringing up is an interesting proposal, and one that makes sense when you use that, I guess, ideology more ubiquitously amongst the population, that there are some people that prefer to draw their partners away, right? We call them whipped, right? Those people would be whipped, right? Right? You know what I'm saying?
But
And
I
it
mean,
goes,
like it could be really anybody doing it,
yeah,
right?
it goes both ways. I'm not
They go
saying
both
it's
ways.
not only women to men, it's totally men with
Mhm.
women too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
It's
all over the place.
yeah, it's all over
Mhm.
the place. And so yeah, so that's an I have never really thought about it in general like that, but it definitely makes sense. It makes sense, in
Yeah, it's
that
been interesting
perspective.
because even if you're like, okay, this is a platonic relationship, it should be fine.
Yeah,
Even if you respect that boundary, we can still be emotionally, intellectually close. No, nope, gone.
yeah. And I
And
think I
that's
agree with
stunned me.
you.
I've been like legitimately multiple times like kind of like shocked. And I'm not the dumbest person in the world. So if something happens, I usually will pick up the pattern, but this has
Yeah,
been so outside of my own nature that I'm like a
sure.
little stunned,
Yeah,
by this
yeah,
feature. It's very strange to me. It's just, I guess we can all think about it for ourselves, but it's something that's so alien to
yeah,
my inner world that
yeah.
I can't understand it. I can't understand doing it. If someone asked me to do that, I'd be like, I don't think I'm doing that. It's not like I don't love you, but I'm not doing that. And and even if someone wanted to do it for me, I'd be like, please don't do that. So I can't
Right,
understand it from like either end.
right.
But I guess that is Esther Perel's point. If we're honest about it, she says this is the specialness vibe of people. They want the other person to have
Yeah.
experiences. They want the other person to do these things. It's interesting, you know?
Yeah.
It's really interesting. In the interview that she does, that I used to kind of like tap into this idea of exclusivity and uniqueness, because I like her framing on that.
Yeah.
She kind of like talks about with the person who's doing the interview. It's a curious interview, Daniel. I'll pop it out to you at some point. It's a
Sure.
guy named Tao Rispuli. The backstory is so great. So his mom went to Italy at some point, had a love affair with some Italian or like aristocrat nobility. He was 50. I think she was maybe late teens, early 20s or something. He was the
Sure.
product of this relationship. So he's like a Italian nobleman by name, but he's also like an American dude on some level. He's a very interesting guy. And then he married, there's an actress named Olivia Wilde. Does that name ring anything to you at all?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, he was married to her. So they
Okay.
married when she was 18. He was like in his mid 20s or something, and they were married for 11 years. And the reason he's talking to Esther Perel is he's doing a documentary film about relationships because he made it apparently after his divorce with Olivia Wilde. She was like, I'm ending this relationship. And she did it, I guess, because she was like, I didn't experience enough of the world. I didn't get a chance to do the things I need to do. So you have to go. And as I was watching it, I had told the story of my own experience with my first love, Susan. And that same question came up. And, she proposed something different, that we open up the relationship and do this in a different way. But
Hmm.
he'd gone through the same thing. And apparently this experience drove him. He's also a documentary filmmaker and a philosopher. So he started asking all these profound questions about the nature of love. And so it gets to a point where they're talking about this. And Esther Perel says there's also this thing called emotional infidelity. Have you
Right.
even heard about this? So she's telling
Oh
this
yeah.
guy,
Yeah.
this, do you even get this concept? And she kind of like has this puzzled expression on her face, like, that's a thing. Can you believe it? And I was watching it going, yeah, Esther, I have a hard time believing it. But it's a thing for sure. People really
Yeah.
feel it. So,
Yeah.
anyways, I want to just, we're going into this thing because you brought up this whole issue of like,
Yeah.
I don't think it should be something where you feel like you have to give up your primary commitments and all that. You think there should be space for this, but for a lot of people, there really isn't, if I'm going to be
Right.
honest about it. So I
Correct.
don't know how much that's an American thing. Esther Perel seems semi-shocked about it still, as a
Yeah. So I
concept.
mean, for
Yeah.
our international audience, right? If hit us up. I think we have about a third of our audience is international. So, or even if you're from the US, but you have connections with people outside, ask them,
Yeah.
see what their thoughts are. I mean, because we're genuinely curious.
Yeah, I really am. Now, I know a lot of people from other cultures and there's different attitudes in other cultures. That's
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
I know a certain number of people from Eastern Europe and there's lots of open relationships and part of the culture
Yeah.
that I know, right?
Yeah.
Especially from Russia, you know. And at some point I got curious about this and I looked up like which cultures are the most fine with people, being open in this way. And the big winner was, drum roll, I still remember the number, 38% it was Russia.
Okay.
18% was Czechoslovakia. Yeah. And our anthropologist on call, Demand or Tap, Ryan
Yes.
Davenport, has Bohemian roots. So I was just like saying, how do you think about this, Ryan?
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's a married guy. So, but in any case, like, do you feel like you have Bohemian roots? And that's up to him to talk about. But no, he's a married dude. Um, but in any case, it's interesting. Cultures do have differences. But America,
Yeah.
this is very, very not tolerant of this. And like, again, it's been a shock, if I'm honest about it. I've been really surprised in my life. People that I was very, very close with, gone. And in some cases, that's been with women I've known where I'd be like, okay, well, we could be platonic. That's fine, but I like the emotional, intellectual closeness. No.
Sure.
And then even with dudes, it's very strange.
Mm.
Do you understand it personally? Like I don't have any spot to get that. I just don't have it in me. So it's hard for
So
me to even intellectually. I mean, I can understand it intellectually, but like the emotional stuff, like I don't get it on some level.
I have there's two thoughts there sort of parallel. One is that it takes two to tango, and that
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I don't think that somebody proposes that as a means, as a rule of engagement. I think it sort of happens with time. Some people are more needy than others, and that's a function of their person. So it might be unconscious. Of course, you might have somebody who that is conscious with, and they're sort of manipulating a little bit in that way. But then the other part is that, like, depending how people view relationships, if they view this, partnership as the primary, most important thing in their life, then they will likely prioritize it as that and remove resources from other relationships and funnel it towards that. And I don't know that that's necessarily wrong either. You know what I'm saying? It's just, it gets to the question for me really lies in, like, on the inside, right? And your heart of hearts, like, are you cool with that? Are you cool with the shedding of the strength of you and your community around you? Is that because your actions are saying that that's a priority, that this is a priority. But I'm wondering, are you even aware that that's happening? And I'm gonna maybe play or put more faith in the people and saying, I'm not sure that they're conscious that it's actually happening.
Mhm.
That, like, oh, I'm just hanging out with this person. Oh, they have a huge friend group. Oh, they have a huge family. And I have, like, my obligations are now changing. And therefore my buddies or my girlfriends or whatever, they're just, I'll see them when I see them. They're always going to be there. We have a history, blah, 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 but this is where I want to be and what's important to me. And so people doing prioritization is just a natural function of life in general. But I don't know that, like, people are aware of this particular point, that it appears as if you have chosen this relationship, not the person, the relationship, because they're different.
Mhm.
They're linked, but they're not the same, over all of these other ones. And that's okay. That's your choice. I think it will be, if you, like, for example, if you and your friend had a conversation and your buddy was like, hey, Eric, sorry, man, I'm just not going to be talking to you as much,
What's the
or
weird part about that is
whatever.
you really can't even have that conversation because it's
Exactly.
already getting to the point of like, hey, I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing this guy's wife or something.
Right.
That's going to put him on the defensive
Right. But it
with
would,
male friends,
it should come from the other person, actually.
Yeah,
In
yeah, it
my
would
in
have to
my
be
opinion, it
that
should
way.
come
It would
from
have
that.
to
They
be
should
that
just
way.
say, hey,
But
you
I
know
don't,
what?
yeah,
We're
you're
just
right. I
into
don't
it.
even know if they necessarily even frame it that way. And it would be awkward to do it because then you really have to say, oh, my partner wants to cut me off from other sources
Or
of
they want
connection.
to.
And so therefore, or they want to do it themselves,
They
I
want to do it
suppose. Yeah,
themselves. That's what I'm
themselves.
saying.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
it
yeah,
it,
yeah.
it might
Well,
be a little
listen,
bit of both.
on a certain level, if you're an exclusivity person for us exclusivist people out there,
Mm-hmm.
and this is what you want to do, rock on, do
It's
you.
fine.
You know what I mean? I think the point that I've always wondered about is whether this is compulsory in the
Mm,
sense of like there's a expectation that the culture has, that the partner has, that you're going to do this. And so people feel kind of under a pressure to do this. That I really wonder about,
yeah.
especially for other people, when you talk about elements of where, I don't know, this could be like a person where there's deep feelings between, two people. Even if the feelings can be like put in a platonic space, people will demand that people cut,
Right.
because so is that compulsory or is that voluntary? I don't know the answer to
Yeah. I
that.
don't
But I
know.
think there's a cultural, I mean, I'm going to take the position for the
Yeah.
point of this podcast that there's a real cultural pressure around this because
Sure.
if it happens, if it seems to happen a lot, then you start thinking this is beyond just
Yeah.
maybe each individual's personal decision. This is like a cultural thing that's deeper. And
And
I guess I'd be curious to hear people like from other places. Do you even have an emotional infidelity concept? Esther Perel's point in part is like, not only other cultures don't necessarily have the physical infidelity idea, they kind of go more like, okay, we understand people aren't going to be really monogamous. Okay, let's just, but American culture is not like that. American culture is like, okay, we're going to say we are, though we know people really aren't. American culture is monogamous in all kinds of ways. It's
Mhm.
sexually monogamous for sure, because as Dan Savage likes to say, that's an extinction level event for a lot of relationships for people. That's
I'd
going to
say
blow
most
it
of
up,
it. Most. Yeah.
not for me, So it depends on your
I'm,
perspective. You know what I mean?
I mean, it was my mom who we had on the podcast before. Yeah, you guys could check those episodes out. Nadia's Journey, which is a
Yeah, yeah.
fun episode to do with my mom. Definitely learn more about her in that
I
way.
loved I loved the fact that I got to do that one as the interview because Daniel was like, "You interview my mom." I was like, "I don't even know your mom," but it was really fun
That was the
because
point.
it was like getting someone who didn't know her, and I think it was interesting for us both. All
Yeah,
three
no,
of us. Yeah,
for
all
sure.
three of us. Yeah,
But yeah, she brought it up to me, and this is probably, like, I don't know, maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. We were just talking about just stuff in general, and I was like, oh well, mom, what if, you know, this is her ex-husband now. I was like, oh, what if he cheated on you? She's like, I mean, she's like, would he still want to be in a relationship with me or not? And I'm like, yeah, no, he would. He just had a, you know, he had a fling with somebody or not. She's like, couples can work through whatever they choose to work through. That's their relationship to deal with. And the
Mhm.
outside people, what are we going to say if that person makes them happy and they're good for each other? He did this thing. Okay, am I going to beat the guy up over? He still wants to work with me. Okay, we go do some work on our communication. We work on things. I hear out what he has to say. He hears what I have to say, and we try and make our relationship better for it. She's like, but people make it through far worse things than that,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
And so she's like, the point is like, well, that's
Well, so your
nuclear
your
for
mom is
some.
already probably in a, you know, a much more small group, a much more small minority of people.
But that was, for
She's
me,
already kind of like an outlier. You know what I
that
mean?
was one of the first times that I, you know, and that's coming from my mom, who's a, serial monogamous person,
Hmm.
and that was her. And maybe, she's a little bit, she's older than, obviously she's older than me, and she's had more life experience and relationships and whatnot. And she's been, a psychologist, or, seen patients in this way. And I just think that shaped her opinion, but it was, we weren't having the conversation about this particular thing. And so the fact that she said that was more, I don't know, it changed the way that I saw relationships in general, number one, on that particular topic, number two. But then it also made the relationship like a thing that was alive, that is sort of like forward moving, that can take on different shapes and can be of different strength and of different colors and different looks based on what you put into it, So it's not just like a rigid thing that stands firm like this. So as we have these conversations like this, that whole thing, it's not just binary, right? It's not this one, and then two magnets pull them in and now they're stuck together. No, because actually in reality, the one person has a community all around them and attached to them, and the other person has a community around them that's attached to them. They both together as a couple have friends that they know as other couples that are attached to them, and so on and so forth, from work and play and wherever else they're into. And so you're never removing people from it. Actually, you're just asking them to change to ones that have more, I don't want to say this in a mean way, but superficial connections, so that
Hmm.
they can
Hmm.
be, pulled from one to the other, and whatnot. Because it's going to happen again. Everybody has friends. Like it's going to do what it's going to do.
Yeah, I mean, like I think it's a very, all I can say is I think there's a cultural exclusivity paradigm.
Yeah.
When we could talk to listeners from other places, I think Esther Perel's point is something like that the extent of that is very uniquely American. That's her opinion.
Mm-hmm.
The degree of that is like very strong in this culture, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to like from her being a cross-cultural person, she just doesn't feel like that's as strong in other cultures,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
American culture, as she points out, if people feel threatened, if people feel like even, I guess we're talking about emotional infidelity as much as other infidelities, people will divorce,
Yeah.
rather than, what your mom is talking about, right? So anyways, it's interesting. All I can say is, again, from my point of view, I think, at least from my attitude, and I'll take myself as the uniqueness person,
Mm-hmm.
like I would want to see a partner have the connections that they want to have. And I would feel bad cutting them off from those people if it seemed important to them. I would have to respect their point of view,
Yeah.
and I would respect the fact that they have their own lives. I mean, uh, when I die, I wouldn't expect someone to toss themselves in the funeral pyre. They have their own life, they have their own existence, and I wouldn't want to cut someone off from people who they think are important. I just wouldn't
Right.
want to do that. But I mean, that's really, I think, in my trying to do this in these episodes is just to like present, like, okay, maybe I do have a certain orientation to the world. Maybe I'm far on one end of this uniqueness paradigm or
Right.
something, right?
Right.
And for me, that's how it feels,
Right.
And I could acknowledge, like, if someone else comes through that someone feels deeply connected with, I'm gonna like respect it. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, that's what you need to do. That's what you need to do. But I don't think that's American culture. I really don't. I think
No,
that's an
and
outlier position. Yeah.
I also think that like it looks at the way in which you view life in general, which has been, how we
Which is
started
the underlying theme of the episodes. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
How do you look at life?
How
Yeah.
do you look at life? And if you look at, and not just for your, not just as a, not just like exclusively, not relationship wise, but not exclusively for yourself, but for your intermediates, right? Your partner, your kids, your close friends or whatnot. If you view them as also walking on their path and doing the same thing that you're doing, then I guess inherently you'd want them to have as full of an experience as they would. With
I
the
mean, that's the core of the uniqueness
yeah,
idea, right? If you want
but
to get to a core value there. Yeah, that is it.
but
Yeah.
with the understanding that like you're both doing it voluntarily at the same time together, you know? So you're in
Mhm,
these
mhm,
kind
mhm.
of like we're doing the same thing. We're just doing it together. It's not that like I have to squeeze your hand and drag you and you have to drag me and we're kind of like it's not like it's just a different view, a different long-term view
It
of
probably says something
community.
about like people who are strong on uniqueness and people who are strong on exclusivity are going to have a hard time like
Yeah.
harmonizing their worldviews because
Mhm.
it's a different thing.
Yeah.
For me in the episodes, I think it's like trying to explain like I mean, what is this? What's the underlying view of reality behind this? And I
Right.
suppose the idea I would have is that there's deep karmic connections between people that are going to come from all kinds of places in all kinds of directions. And then the richness of life is fed by not just this one thing with this one person, but the richness of all of these connections
Right.
is what feed,
Right.
and I obviously, and the word karma fits into this, and if we look at Jung and then maybe EQ as we kind of maybe have the last 10 minutes before we have to wrap up today or something, because it's a good subject matter to like kind of do it and
Yeah.
kind of do it and close it out. But he obviously gets the idea that he thinks about, say, his connection with both his wife and then one of his romantic partnerships, this Sabrina Spira, and he talks about her as like it's a reincarnation driven thing. He really thinks about her that way, you know.
Hmm.
And even when he writes in some of his memoirs, he could still see he's still thinking about her decades later, and he thought, okay, we had some karmic thing between the two of us, right? And he feels this way, that it's kind of like this. It's an underlying sort of semi-mysterious but karmic thing between like two people. And EQ's thing is similar, right? As a Zen master, he says there's this red thread of passion that can't be cut. Part of that is talking about like sexuality. He basically says, okay,
Right.
you can't cut sexuality. Sexuality is going to like be a thread through all people's lives. A lot of times he's read that way, but I like to make the point about him, uh, as one of my kind of personal favorites on masters and poets, that there's clearly so much more that he's talking about. He's
Hmm.
talking about the idea of like when you have a deep connection with someone, that's kind of uncuttable in its way too. That's the red thread of passion. It's not just sex, it's something more than that.
Hmm.
Because he talks about that even with his daughter, that thread that binds the two of them. He has like this great little verse where he says, watching my 4-year-old daughter dance, I can't break free of her. That's the red thread of passion, right? Connecting two people together. And then he talks about it obviously in his more sexual love and romantic life, where he talks about, uh, uh, he says a woman is enlightenment with when you are with her, and the red thread of passion binds the two of you together or something like that, right? It's not just sexuality, you know.
Hmm.
Uh, both of your passions flare inside you when you see. This isn't just like swiping left,
Right.
on some app. He's talking about something deeper. Towards the end of his life, he's really famous. Just throwing a little bit about him in here, because it gives you another perspective besides just the Jungian one. Um, but he, developed this very deep relationship with this blind musician and singer at the end of his life. And he says something like, I was like an old leafless tree until we met. Green buds burst out and blossom. Now that I have you, I'll never forget what I owe you. So he's
Hmm.
talking about something that like just brings him back to life. And it's interesting because I thought about that Esther Perel thing with this too, where she says the people that she knew who came to life again after the concentration camp experiences were the
Right.
ones who like reignited the red thread of passion,
Hmm.
to use EQ's thing. So, anyways, it's kind of an interesting thing. I wanted to kind of share those, like the Jungian thing, because he obviously thought about this in some karmic way. It looks to me like EQ is thinking about this in this deeply kind of karmic way. And all I can really say is I guess I strongly, strongly believe in that. To the
Hmm.
extent that we're like creating a worldview, this is part of the soup of my worldview. This is going into the pot, right? This is
Hmm.
a an ingredient in the thing. And anyways, I don't know what you got. At the end of this part, you got something more? I mean, what do you think about all of that? I mean, how's that manifest in your life? And what do you think about
You
that?
know, the only thought I've had in my head for the last 4 minutes, I'm gonna share it now, and it's related. But, um, I asked this question like, what are some of the benefits in monogamy? And I apologize to our listeners for me taking such a long time to come to this, but whatever. I feel like
Oh, is
that.
this the thing that you asked like episodes and episodes and episodes ago?
Yeah, I did. I know. But it comes
You
when it
asked me
comes.
this like literally like 8 episodes ago, and you asked me it, and I was like, dude, I don't know what to say yet because I hadn't had this conversation
That's right.
because I don't believe in it as much as other people do. So,
Right.
anyways, I didn't know how
So
to answer it at the time. I
so
was like,
I
I'm gonna come back to this later.
what is in my head, there's a whole bunch of images playing in my head, but basically what I see is that like the original arrangement, right? Like an arranged marriage was done for bonding, building ties, connecting communities, very likely, right? Nobility
Connecting
and
families together and nobilities and
keeping
property
families
and these
together,
kinds of
right? So you
things. Yeah, yeah.
strengthen these ties. And so that's one part. And they were arranged, which is, still how many marriages are in the world. And like we talked about last episode, sometimes that works out really well. They're like, it's great.
And
And
yeah,
other times it's totally miserable. And usually the woman gets the short end of the stick on those deals.
it also
Usually.
depends a little bit. Like in talking with Ryan Davenport, anthropologist on tap, the idea that like as he's confirming to me, like 60% of Indian women, not that these are all arranged marriages anymore, but it tells something about the culture within urban centers are like having affairs.
Mm-hmm.
So that also matters too. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
those arranged marriage things, they were sort of like marriages in name, but it wasn't
Yeah.
based on the idea of an ideal love or something like we have in American culture,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? American culture this is based on some more idealized version of love,
Right. And that
which I mean, that could be your attitude and your value system. There's no judgment even on that, but yeah.
Yeah, so having that as like as the source of sort of background to the argument, then that like that tradition then moves forward, and instead of somebody else telling you what to do, you are the one who's choosing it, and then
Yeah,
you
yeah.
recreate the large banquet of putting two different same family or two different families or clans or whatever together to have a meal, to get to know each other so that they feel like maybe there'll be a less chance of war between them, or whatever the case is.
Or they can cooperate in life, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Huh?
yeah. So there, I think therein lies the benefit. But then in actuality, once that the moment of the nuptials is completed, then you have to go about and living, right? And that's the more difficult part. And that we live longer, generally speaking. Life has more ups and downs. There's more influences on our time and our attention and everything else. And we're more separated at the same time, that we have more opportunities to explore various experiences in life, should we choose to do so, that then these types of relationships become a possibility, actually.
Mm.
And that in itself may be scary for some people who have yet to arrive to that sense of potential as a I don't know, as an opening for something different, and that different is bad regardless of what that different is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. So if something seems different or threatening, then it's like your guard goes up, your hackles go up, and
Yeah,
you feel threatened or intimidated by it.
right. And so
You know, yeah.
and I feel like that's the resistance is,
Mhm.
and that's okay. Like that's we, I'm okay with it.
It's kind of a funny thing. All I can really, say as we get to the capper of this is just to say, if I'm writing my own view of the world,
Yes.
how it works for me, and we're all going to do this for ourselves.
Yeah.
My own experience of this has been that you're going to meet people in your life who are extremely special for whatever that magical alchemical thing is that happens between people. Something like this happens. And I haven't had the experience where it's been like a unilateral thing and been real. My experiences has been if you meet someone and it's alchemical, right? Then most people tend to really feel it. People know it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you could have like unrequited love or something, and these things
Mm-hmm.
happen. But my own experience, this has been more like when two people who are really bonded in this way, what EQ is talking about, or what Jung is talking about, when that, or like what Rumi's writing about, you know, if this happens, both people seem to know it somehow, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's real. And if you want to call it the red thread that binds the two people together or something, that starts to starts to zing and vibrate between those two people. Something meaningful is happening there.
Yeah.
And I suppose for me, and again, I'm coming from this uniqueness perspective, but for me, I like the idea that there will be space for those things to happen, you know? And again, I think after my experiences with Susan back in the day, I have had this conversation where I've said like, okay, we're close, but if there's someone else in my life who I think is important, I'm not going to cut them out
Right.
because of you. I'm not going to do that. So don't think I'm going to, because I'm not, but it's because of this underlying value system, which I think per what we're trying to do here, I think relates to a certain metaphysics, actually.
Yeah.
A certain way of looking at the world where you say, yeah, there are certain kinds of karmic threads between people that are so powerful and so significant that they should be allowed to be. Right. But again, that's not going to be, necessarily everyone's attitude. Okay. And I don't think it's the cultural attitude either. I think the cultural attitude is kind of hostile towards this, if I'm honest about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even if, even as we come to the end here, I'm just thinking about like even current occupational tendencies for the population is to have 5 to 7 careers amongst the time that you're working,
Yeah.
Whereas before it would be 1 to 2, right? Like previous, up until 2000.
Yeah, probably for my dad, because you got fired from one, then you got forced out or something. Like he would probably try to stay at the same place forever if he could.
And before that, it was a skill. You were a blank farmer. You were a tradesperson. You were a whatever courier, whatever you were. That's what you did. That's all that you did. That was your life.
Yeah.
And your kids probably inherited it and so on. Whatever you did. You know what I'm saying? And so there's just the openness is an ever increasing facet of, I guess I could say, modern living, in this way. And this,
I wonder about that a little bit. We can pick it up the next slide. I didn't mean that I don't want to kill your flow or anything like that.
No, yeah,
but if I look at like my grandpa, he worked in steel mills his whole life, but he was a pretty wild dude. He was like promiscuous as hell. He had a lot of people he knew. He was always out doing something. So I don't know. It's an interesting question. I don't know if this is like, I don't know what that means, just to throw it out there. It's kind of an episode to dump something like that out. But anyways, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, like Tucker Carlson, all we do is ask questions. I just ask questions.
Yeah, I think that's the one point of commonality you have with Tucker Carlson.
Human male.
The overlap. Yeah, I guess so. Okay, 2. 2 points. Yeah. You both were there too, I suppose.
That's right. Yeah. That goes in the humanity of part of it.
Yeah. All right. So I don't know. I'm not trying to like, you're kind of talking about it. There's more openness maybe in some ways, but I don't know. It's kind of an interesting question. Yeah. All right. Anyway, so to be continued, I suppose, is, I'm sure we're stretch run of this, but I think it's good questions. And I think the underlying thing is like asking to the people out here, like, what do you believe?
Yeah.
Hit us up. Yeah. We're showing like a way of thinking about a certain way of looking at the world. You'll come up with your own way, but it's an exploration of that.
Yeah. Hit us up at ginandtantra@gmail.com. You can leave a message on the Instagram, or just feel free to pop it in right in the YouTube video. However you are consuming our media these days, we appreciate all of the love and the views and the contacts. We definitely, the conversations that we have here ring and echo through my week, and I definitely bring them into my other conversations. And sometimes, people who listen to us will hit me up and be like, hey, you said this thing and made me think about that thing. And, it's really wonderful. So, thank you to everybody who's been rocking with us for a day or a year or, whatever. We appreciate everybody. So, hit us up, hit us back, share our work. We love it. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Eric, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And for Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.